Pure Hackmons is a metagame that allows you to use any Pokemon with any combination of moves and abilities you please. It stands out for being the most anarchical tier in Pokemon history, and while I generally avoid other metagames, something about Pure Hackmons fascinated me, mainly because I wondered how anyone could possibly have fun with it, or at least take the competitive scene even a little bit seriously. That's why I've always been so curious about why Gen 6 Pure Hackmons is still played and beloved by so many people. Why is it the only generation of Pure Hackmons with a ladder? This stood out to me a ton, as it's an anomaly we've never seen in Pokemon. Something I realize, though, is that it's literally my job, or lack thereof, to answer the questions you've never asked. As such, let me explain why Gen 6 Pure Hackmons is the only tier we play. Well, this tier explains my point perfectly. Before researching for this video, I asked Sheeplol, a very trusted friend as well as being a top 500 Gen 6 Pure Hackmons player, what he thinks about every generation of Pure Hackmons. Along with this, I tried to jokingly guess what Pokemon is the most dominant. For RBY, I joked it would be 6 Mewtwo's, no different from anything goes. But I was very wrong. Before I explain why, though, I want to note that the current RBY and GSE Pure Hackmons metagames aren't entirely accurate to the spirit of the original games. In said games, you can start a battle with a status condition. This is obviously not implemented on Showdown, as it's not only a pain to implement, but is also seen as uncompetitive. Like, just imagine how much less fun RBYOU would be if Chansey could start paralyzed instead of needing to maneuver itself into a position where it could be paralyzed. It removes a lot of depth, pretty much. Despite this mechanic would completely change the way that RBY Pure Hackmons is played. Not only because of the tier's lack of restrictions, but also because of RBY sleep mechanics. As such, the metagame I'll be describing in this video is very different from what it would be without this detail. What do I mean by this though? Well, in RBY exclusively, you cannot move on the turn you wake up. As such, if you give the perfect accuracy of Spore to an Electrode, who is the fastest Pokemon, then you infinitely put every Pokemon to sleep without taking damage. As a result, every game revolves around a 50-50 lead matchup surrounding who can put each other's Electrode to sleep first. If you land the Spore first, then you can use Agility to outspeed the Electrode switching in, and once you do that, you can use Spore again and spam damaging moves before any one Pokemon can make up. In terms of damaging options, Super Feint and Seismic Toss are the most common, as they do consistent damage and have a ton of PP. Despite seeming unbeatable though, they do have a check, and that's Chansey. Sure, you need multiple of them, but Chansey doesn't take much from Seismic Toss, and if you switch around well, then you can waste Electrode Spore PP and put yourself back into the positive Electrode matchup. Sure, this doesn't mean much, but it at least gives a sliver more depth than a coin flip. It's because of this that a set was created to defeat Chansey spam, and that's Swords Dance, which beats the style for obvious reasons. People even went as far as to run Rhydon, Articuno, and Dragonite to beat it, although these Pokemon are no longer seen as they can't deal with the standard Electrode set. It's because of this that a tier that could have some depth becomes nothing more than Electrode and Chansey running about. So yeah, this is an extremely limiting, centralizing, and downright unplayable metagame. Let's hope it gets better from here. Spore, thankfully, is not broken in GSE Pure Hackmons. This is because of the additions of Sleep Talk, which allows you to use a random move in sleep, and Mint Berry, which wakes you up and acts as a Chesto Berry would now. It's because of this that Electrode went from completely dominant to simply a solid support Pokemon. Despite this, Spore is still obviously a strong move. While Sleep Talk users do completely counter the move, Mint Berry users only get one opportunity to do so before they can be put back to sleep again. And when OHKOs pretty much never happen in GSC, it should be made clear that Mint Berry cannot fix everything. Despite this, Mint Berry users can still play around this flaw, and they do it with setup moves. Setup sweepers are extremely common in GSC Pure Hackmons, as their ability to break past otherwise bulky Pokemon is invaluable. While I could go into depth about every setup sweeper, I'm instead going to summarize what makes them good. To start, Belly Drum Mewtwo is one of the fastest sweepers, packing an impressive special attack stat to give it unpredictable coverage options alongside that. Swords Dance Ho-Oh is immune to the commonly spammed Sacred Fire. while also being one of its best abusers. Swords Dance Gengar uses its immunities to priority, normal, and fighting type moves to act as a defensive backbone to many teams. Belly Drum Extreme Speed Snorlax is horrifying for, well, obvious reasons. Belly Drum Aerodactyl is a fast Aeroblast spammer who can afford Spore. So, those were the Pokemon worth mentioning. It goes without saying that these Pokemon have a stranglehold on the metagame, so I think it would be best to see what responds to them. Well, only two things: Oko spam and Spore support. On the Oko side, the most prominent user is Lugia, who can heal with Rest and absorb Spore with Sleep Talk, then pack its bulk with Horn Drill and Fissure, and the luck reliant moves won't seem nearly as up to the die. A huge part of why Oko moves weren't used in RBY either is that they only have 8 PP, but Sleep Talk makes that a non-issue. Despite seeming great though, this set does have its flaws, mainly that setup sweepers can just boost past it, and if you can't land a Horn Drill in time, you risk getting swept. Despite this, Oko moves are still something to be very scared of. Spore support, meanwhile, is a strategy used to support Pokemon like Lugia who need setup sweepers dealt with. Of course, Electrode comes to mind immediately, with its ability to baton pass substitute being invaluable. Outside of that though, other prominent users are the previously mentioned Aerodactyl, alongside Mewtwo and Gengar. I personally think that using Gengar in this role suits itself a lot nicer. Before concluding this though, there is one more playstyle to mention, and that's Spike support. Of course, this style lends itself best to bulky Pokemon like Blissey and Snorlax. So yeah, that's the GSE Pure Hackmons metagame. It may not have much variety, but it seems perfectly playable. But wanna know what's more playable? Me when you're mom. Ha! You thought I was gonna tell you to subscribe, didn't you? Speaking of that though, you may as well do so, as the drawbacks for not doing so are immense. These include making me unable to feed my family, buy a mansion, brag about my wealth, and making Azurill cry. If you make Azurill cry, then I might just call you a sussy baka. Don't worry though, if the 34% of you subscribed turns into 10 billion, then I can finally get this damn thing to stop crying before I sheer cold it out of existence. Speaking of sheer cold, let's get back to your regularly scheduled garbage. While normally, ADV would be where EVs and IVs changed everything, that wouldn't be the case in ADV Pure Hackmons, where you can max out all of your EVs. But hey, at least natures weren't invalidated. Another thing that changed Pokemon forever was abilities. And while future generations of Pure Hackmons allow any Pokemon to use any ability, ADV Pure Hackmons is the only time where that isn't the case. Interestingly too, this wasn't discovered until later, as you can see forum posts from years ago showing sample sets without this detail. Thankfully then, people weren't able to grow used to this metagame before in October of 2019, Smogon user Doipy Hooves discovered that the ability slot is stored/editable in the save. I have no clue what that means since I'm no programming nerd, but what I do know is that this change alone gives a ton of potential for the tier to be unique. Tragically though, this all ends when you realize how dominant Slacking is. But wait, you're not allowed to give Slacking pure power. Well yes, you're right about that, but I am allowed to give Slacking no ability. And while Wonder Guard and Pure Power wouldn't break the tier, it would instead be Slacking spamming Belly Drum and Extreme Speed to effortlessly cleave through every Pokemon in the game. Gengar isn't even a reliable check, as Shadow Ball cooks it as well. It's because of this that the tier is overly centralized around beating Slacking and nothing else. In that case, focusing on how to beat Slacking would be wise, as to not give this metagame too much of a bad rap. There are only two answers. And yes, I'm not kidding. Slacking is that broken. But what are those answers? Well, they're priority users and phasers. The problems then are that said priority users need to be faster, and phasers are only temporary stops to it. With that tragedy out of the way then, I may as well discuss the rest of the metagame. Things that stayed the same were the power of Spore and setup sweepers, while the nerf to Sleep Talk being unable to call rest practically removed the use of Oko moves. Meanwhile, abilities still did change a lot. The most prominent ones are weather-related, with weather setters and abusers being just as prominent as they are in Ubers. As for other abilities, Speed Boost makes Ninjask the best Spore abuser, while Pressure stalls the many 8PP moves lying around, and Trapping abilities prevent many annoying Pokemon from sticking the landing. Outside of that, though, there isn't much to say about ADV Pure Hackmons, a tier where one change, which initially seemed innocent enough, broke a meta to its core. It goes without saying, but the ability to use any ability on any Pokemon completely changed the way people played Pure Hackmons. Now, instead of a no-ability Slacking running around, that Slacking would have its already massive attack doubled by huge power. Slacking became a lot worse though because of Wonder Guard, which would go on to define Pure Hackmons for the rest of its existence. If you're unaware, Wonder Guard makes you immune to any type you're not weak to. This is an incredible defensive ability, and it's for this reason that pairing two Wonder Guard users together would be required to make a good team, as these cores can help make up for each other's weaknesses and switch between each other to take any attack in the game. These Pokemon aren't impenetrable though, as there are a few mechanics which help balance it out. The first one is Mold Breaker, which is an ability which ignores the opponent's abilities. If that description didn't make it obvious, Mold Breaker would go on to become a staple of the tier. It's not required though, as you can also run Gaster Acid to remove the opponent's ability. Sure, it's not perfect, since the Wonder Guard user can just switch out, but you can also use that to your advantage to hit the switch for big damage, or even Pursuit Trap the Wonder Guard user. Gaster Acid, despite existing in DPP though, wouldn't become a staple until later, as the generation has another exclusive option, which bypasses Wonder Guard. This option is Fire Feign. Now, I know you're confused by this, so let me explain. Due to a programming error, Fire Feign ignores the effects of Wonder Guard. While in every other format, this error doesn't make a single difference since Shedinja is weak to Fire Feign anyway, in Pure Hackmons, it completely changes the way the game is played. Now, this change can make or break the metagame for you. On one hand, it can be the defining feature which helps freshen the game up, while on the other, it over-centralizes the game even further, and it's for this reason that if you want to run an ability like Huge Power or No Guard, then Fire Feign is practically a must, and it makes the already abundant Water-type Wonder Guard users even more common as a result. Of course though, Wonder Guard isn't the center of the universe, as Spore is still very good. A great abuser of it is Deoxys Speed, who uses No Guard to spam perfectly accurate Oko moves. Damn though, who knew Wonder Guard would be a blessing? It's due to Wonder Guard that this set isn't broken, but Gaster Acid can at least add in some extra prediction. A quick note too is that if you're really desperate to beat Deoxys Speed, then you can use a Speed Boost user, but this generally isn't advised, as Deoxys Speed isn't enough of a threat to justify it. Oh yeah, right, trapping abilities are also very good at handling Wonder Guard users, as you can hit them at their weaknesses, or force them to run the non-optimal Shed Tail item to defeat them. So overall, DPP Pure Hackmons, while not for everyone, is certainly one of the most playable. Unfortunately, Black and White Pure Hackmons is hampered by two things. It's certainly playable, but it's severely flawed. To start with the lesser reason, Copycat is weirdly broken in Black and White. While the capacity for priority-boosted Prankster Whirlwinds to annoy the whole tier was only tested with Riolu pissing off low-ladder players in OU, in Pure Hackmons, you can give those traits to a Pokemon with actual stats. It's because of this that having a Magic Bounce user on every team is a requirement, as otherwise, hazard damage will slowly whittle you down as you lose to a Bidoof spamming Copycat Whirlwinds at you. Despite this isn't nearly as bad as I'm making it out to be. This is because Magic Bounce is a great ability on its own, mainly for its capacity to block hazards. I didn't mention this earlier, but hazards were an essential part of DPP Pure Hackmons. This is because they were some of the only ways of beating Wonder Guard users, as they wouldn't want to repeatedly switch into them. Of course, when Wonder Guard is as good as it is, you want to take advantage of it as much as possible, and Magic Bounce allows you to do that without requiring a Rapid Spin user, who can be exploited by Ghost types and Wonder Guard users. So right now, Black and White Pure Hackmons doesn't look that bad. Wrong! The biggest limiting factor for the tier are the sleep mechanics. If you don't know what I mean, Black and White have a bizarre quirk of resetting your sleep counter upon switching. It's for this reason that being put to sleep is equivalent to a KO. To put into perspective how broken this is, OU had a sleep clause, and even then, sleep was too good for the tier. So while sleep was outright banned in OU and Pure Hackmons where restrictions don't exist, we're starting to get Vietnam flashbacks to RB1 Y Pure Hackmons. Just this time, a Pokemon can act when it wakes up, which is at least part of what makes the tier a lot more playable. Another thing which helps the tier is abilities, which allow for far more depth. There are a few options for Spore users. The most obvious one is No Guard, which makes Deoxys spamming Sheer Cold all the stronger. Sure, it still has the weaknesses of needing to rely on Gastro-Acid predictions, but the sleep mechanics make doing so significantly safer. Hell, you can even run Lepa Berry if Sheer Cold PP bothers you that much. As for other abilities, Mold Breaker lets you put Magic Bounce users to sleep, although you'll have to use something other than OHKO moves for your offense, and as a result, this ability isn't recommended. The last ability you can use though is Speed Boost, which lets you outspeed the standard No Guard sets, although you're stonewalled by Magic Bounce users. Really, Magic Bounce is the only thing holding this tier together, although it does such a good job at this that it bounces back on itself and ends up giving the tier some legitimate merit. Wait, what do you mean I forgot about the air balloon? Yeah, Electrode has returned and now it spams Spore while being immune to everything. Granted, even though the set is amazing for obvious reasons, it's not broken due to the existence of status moves and the combination of Gastro-Acid and Pursuit breaking the air balloon. Oh yeah, one last thing. Imposter turns Chansey into a great revenge killer. So yeah, that's Black and White Pure Hackmons. A very bizarre tier, but still an interesting one nonetheless. ORAS Pure Hackmons is the most beloved Pure Hackmons tier by far. It carries on a lot of what made DPP Pure Hackmons well liked, while removing controversial features from the last two generations, like Fire Fang, copycat calling phase moves, and sleep mechanics. Alongside this, many beloved features were added. Of course, there's Magic Bounce, which adds in much needed depth to the Hazard metagame, but it doesn't even end at that. You have Fur Coat to counter Huge Power, Prankster to be annoying, Gale Wing, Zaid abilities, Water Shuriken, and Imposter to break past fast Mold Breaker sweepers, 1000 Arrows to give Mega Manectric the finger, Mega Evolution to change the abilities of Pokemon mid-game, and finally Safety Goggles to make Pokemon immune to Spore. That's not even the only nerf to Spore, as grass types are also immune to it. It's with these two changes that Sleep goes from one of the most frustrating parts of the tier to slightly less frustrating. It's due to all these changes that ORAS Pure Hackmons is the least centralized metagame in the tier's entire history. It's because of this that one thing isn't more broken than anything else, and it ends up opening the floodgates to creative team building more than any other metagame in Pokemon history. That's all there really is to say though. When there's so little to complain about, there's also little to talk about. As such, let's locate the flaws of future Pure Hackmons metagames to uncover why we still play ORAS Pure Hackmons. USUM Pure Hackmons is perhaps the Pure Hackmons tier with the least amount of changes. The changes that do exist though can make or break the experience for many people. It's generally agreed to make the meta worse though. Enough beating around the bush though, what even are they? Well, they're moldy moves and innards out. Starting with moldy moves, what even are they? Well, they're a set of 3 moves which ignore abilities. These are Sunsteel Strike, Moongeist Beam, and Photon Geyser, as well as their Z-move variants, which yes, Z-moves are legal, with you not needing to run a Z-Crystal to use them, and yes, all 3 of these moves have a Z counterpart. Granted, Z-moves only have 1 PP, so instead of wasting an item slot to use them, you instead have to waste a move slot. I got a bit sidetracked though, so let's get back to the point. While moldy moves seem great for dealing with Wonder Guard, that ends up being the problem. These moves are so good that the metagame becomes too centralized around them. If you don't want to run Mold Breaker, then you'll have to use one of these 3 moves. And the moves are strong enough to where Wonder Guard Pokemon are specifically chosen to deal with them. While some enjoy how this change allows for more offensive variety, others dislike how it limits defensive variety. Prior generations had good offensive tools too, so certain people find this change to be overkill. Despite how good these moves are though, they do have a form of counterplay in innards out. To give the basic gist, when something KOs a Pokemon with the ability, said Pokemon will deal the same amount of damage back to the opponent. Sure, this ability may not be broken or anything, but it's still really annoying to have your sweep ended by a sacrifice. Like, not even Mold Breaker can get past it, which only makes it more frustrating, although Magic Guard can, for some reason. Despite these 2 things though, USUM Pure Hackmons is certainly playable, it just may not be for you. If you've watched any of my videos, you know that Gen 8 ruined everything, except for Scald, but that's an exception. Sadly, that exception didn't permeate into SS Pure Hackmons, which is easily the most unplayable. Well, that may not actually be the case, but you'll get your answer to that later. As for now, I may as well lecture you about the stupidity of Eternamax Eternatus. While normally Eternamax Eternatus is known as a Pokemon so strong, with stats so ludicrously high that you can't even use it, in Pure Hackmons you can use it. That in itself isn't the problem though. The problem is that its stats are so high that if you give it a defense boosting nature, it becomes invincible physically, while if you give it a special defense boosting nature, it becomes invincible specially. It's because of this that if you have at least 2 Eternamax Eternatus invested in each stat respectively, you can switch infinitely between them and PP stall your opponent to death. What sucks too is that counterplay to this is very limited. You'd think running a no-guard Regieleki spamming Oko moves would do the trick, but Eternamax Eternatus can just run Neutralizing Gas, an ability that not only ignores abilities, but also completely diffuses them, acting as Mold Breaker on crack. Despite this, Oko moves are still used, as they are some of the only ways to deal with Eternamax Eternatus, even if they require a lot of luck. Not only that, but Oko moves also have a paltry 8 PP, and while that can be bypassed by running Lepa Berry or multiple Oko moves, that still requires a ton of luck. It's because of this that Regieleki doesn't run No Guard, but instead Comatose, since it not only blocks status effects, but can also allow it to run Sleep Talk to spam Priority Whirlwind, which I'm sure Black and White Pure Hackmons players would love to hear. As for other Pokemon, they only exist to deal with Eternamax Eternatus, or their immunity to Oko moves. Kyurem Black is immune to Sheer Cold, while also running Shell Smash to 2-hit KO specially defensive Eternamax Eternatus, and other Shell Smash users include Calyrex Shadow Rider, Zacian Crowned, and the unexpected Indeedee and Obstagoon. To explain away those two, they're used because they are not only immune to Spectral Thief, but also because they have Stab on either Stored Power or Power Trip respectively. As for the rest of the metagame, Cramorant and Ice-Q are both quite good. This is because their abilities are both so special that they not only are exclusive to themselves, but they also can't be affected by Neutralizing Gas. Finally though, Ghost types and Flying types are both very common for being immune to Horn Drill and Fissure respectively. Of all these, the only one I want to bother mentioning is Spiritomb, who with Wonder Guard and Gastro Acid is immune to everything except for the rare Fairy-type coverage moves, essentially forcing you to switch. So it's at least nice to see Wonder Guard sticking around, with the same being said about Magic Mounts, which is good for the previously mentioned Comatose, and is required on teams as a result. It's due to all these reasons that despite having some depth and clever ways to break the mold, that SS Pure Hackmons is still one of the least competitive iterations to exist. Before the discovery of the Ability Shield, SV Pure Hackmons was so bad that the only thing making it better than RBY was the fact that games would be over in a heartbeat. It goes like this. Use Shed Tail turn 1 and then switch into your Neutralizing Gas abusing Shell Smash sweeper like Zacian Crown or Calyrex Shadow Rider, and then hope you get lucky with Speed Ties and win the game in 8 turns. The reason this worked was because abilities like Imposter, Prankster, and 8 abilities wouldn't work under Neutralizing Gas, and because features like Spectral Thief and Gulp Missile were unusable. Thankfully, this version of the metagame didn't last, as the Ability Shield was discovered to prevent the effects of abilities such as Neutralizing Gas and Mold Breaker from taking place. As such, you'd think all of our problems would be solved, right? Wrong. While not completely unplayable, SV Pure Hackmon suffers from a major issue. That issue is the Ability Shield, which despite saving the tier from being unplayable, also comes with a host of its own issues. The biggest one is that the Ability Shield takes your item slot, so incredible items like Shed Shell and Safety Goggles become anything but optimal, which makes trapping abilities and Spore even more of a nuisance than they were before. It's because of this that Wonder Guard went from defining to a struggling ability. Here's the thing though, you still need Wonder Guard, as without it, you can't deal with the variety of game-ending threats in the metagame. There is one benefit Ability Shield Wonder Guard users get though, and that's the previously mentioned immunity to Mold Breaker and Neutralizing Gas. Here's the thing though, users of said abilities can just use Corrosive Gas to remove their items, which yes, is better than Knockoff since it's a status move. The Ability Shield isn't the only thing that makes the meta unique though, as Revival Blessing is a move which essentially allows you a second try at using your Neutralizing Gas or Wonder Guard user, in case you choke with them early to mid-game. Another application for it is the combination of Revival Blessing and Comatose Sleep Talk, which essentially acts the way that Assist Cats did in National Dex formats. As such, the ability to infinitely stall by constantly reviving your team sounds great, but the existence of taunt and priority moves makes the strategy harder to justify. as the style only works if you run multiple of them. Other interesting moves, then, are Ceaseless Edge, which allows you to set up spikes while not being blocked by taunt or magic bounce, and Shed Tail, which gives setup opportunity for your neutralizing gas sweepers. So again, SV Pure Hackmons is certainly playable, but the lack of defense available to check the vast array of offensive options prevents the tier from blossoming to stardom. Well, this one took a while. I had a lot of fun making it though. I knew next to nothing about Pure Hackmons, outside of being a mid-ladder player in Gen 6, so it was nice to learn about something new while making this video, instead of spewing out information that I already knew about myself. This was a real passion project, pretty much. Chances are, though, that every video of mine will be as long as this one, and if that's the case, then the upload schedule will be rather slow. I want to have the uploading consistency of some other creators in the community, but I also had to realize that my goal of polishing these videos to their absolute perfection makes that impossible. My videos take a lot of time to make, so I'm always so grateful to all of you for being able to bear with me. Regardless, I have a few shorter projects coming up. 2 for this channel, 1 releasing tomorrow, and another for the anime channel. If anything, I'm just so glad to be in midwinter break, since it'll allow me to upload with the consistency I want instead of stressing out about school. With that out of the way, I thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you all tomorrow.